Hello, we are live. It is so exciting to be here with Conversations That Matter. This is the first of what I hope will be many in a series of conversations designed to help us think, honestly, because we don't do nearly enough of that in this day and age. So, for those of you who don't know me, I hope that's not the case, but for those who don't, I'm Yorona Boster, certified speaker and communications coach, life coach, speaker, author, podcaster, all around everything I do. And I help people communicate with purpose and integrity with themselves and all those around them. Now, before I introduce my incredible guest, Paul, I have a request for anyone listening or watching. As this series continues, I'd like your input for communication topics that interest you. Now, communication runs a lot deeper than we think. So I'm going to ask that you not be afraid to stretch the limits of where and how communication shapes our lives. And I'm going to ask that you feel free to DM me, drop those ideas in a comment, or even email them to me at Yorona@YoronaBoster.com. All right, now, my lovely guest, Paul, would you tell our audience a little bit about yourself before we jump into our conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. So, I call myself first a talent agent. I'm responsible for putting outstanding storytellers on stage at conferences and fundraisers and trade shows, expos. We've been there, we've seen the featured speakers on stages, and those are the people that I help get on stage. That's number one. The other thing that I do is that I am a presentation performance coach to make sure that whoever takes the stage, whether they're ready to do it, like the featured speakers that we see, to the ones that are working towards that goal. I help those people find their voice, tell that story, and make it stick for their target audience with outstanding storytelling and performances. And those are primarily how I define myself in a professional space. Um, I am also someone who loves to have fun with people and develop the right relationships so that some messy and very meaningful work can get done. And I think that's kind of the foundation that we need to build from. So we'll get into a lot more together, and that's who I am.
That's beautiful. That's what I love. That's why we clicked so well because I believe that in the mess, in the chaos, in all of that is where some of the most beautiful things are created. So I'm very excited. Okay. For our conversation today, a question came to my mind. What makes public speaking so impactful for an audience? Now, we can also look at that question from another angle. Why does public speaking leave such a deep mark on an audience? So
Yeah.
I'd love for your first take on that.
Yeah. So I think of speaking and listening, speaker or performer, and the audience is having a relationship. Like one needs the other. Okay. We can all speak in empty rooms to nobody, and we can all sit in a room with no one on a stage. Doesn't have quite the the most impactful experience is not created when those two components aren't working together. They belong together. It's yin, it's yang, right? So if a public speaking opportunity can be taken advantage of in a way that makes the audience resonate with that content and makes sure that that moment between these two entities that need each other
Mm.
leaves people feeling different, transformed, a 2.0 version of I was one kind of version of myself, I left, and I'm a different kind. It doesn't have to be a life altering change, but something, maybe even incremental
Right.
from the education, the knowledge, the entertainment value that comes from the person doing this and the people doing this, right? So, public speaking has the ability to create the kind of relationship that you want with your audience that they can't get in many other forms. And I think it's a very powerful avenue for relationship building.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that, especially because you hit the nail on the head in my mind at the very end there when you said relationship building. One of the things that I see that's very different about the way we tend to experience a lot of things from a public figure to a private, to an audience, whether private or public audience, is the relationship building. We don't tend to see a lot of it this day and age in a synchronous manner, meaning you're right there as the speaker and the audience is right there as the listeners. We right now, you and I are speaking together, but we don't get the opportunity to see our audience here with
Right.
us. And that can be very limiting in so many ways because we don't know exactly how they're taking us in.
True.
And I
Yeah.
find that there's a power in having a live presence, having a live audience present with you when you're speaking, because there's an immediacy and a vulnerability that is relayed back and forth between the audience and the speaker.
Mm.
And a lot of times this cannot be recreated with a digital replica. That digital content just doesn't get recreated the same way as when you're experiencing something in that live presence. So when I think about a public speaking event and the impact on the audience, there is an immediacy to that that happens in the change effect that's going on right away.
Mm.
What do you think about that?
I don't think there's anything that beats a live experience. Right? Think about listening to your favorite band on your headphones, on the I was going to say CD, and but like I don't know. However, people listen to whatever your I don't CDs. Yeah, we have Amazon Music, and I have a playlist. And when I'm working out or when I'm just kind of contemplating and I'm listening, and it's like great, you know what to expect from the studio version, and it's predictable, and you're like, yeah, that works for me. Like I love this, but a live version of that band or that comedian or that singer or that performer or that public speaker comes with this sense of organic surprises sometimes. The energy, the mood, the feeling between like people in the room leads down paths that aren't scripted sometimes, leads towards energy building moments that aren't anticipated. I like to think of it this way. Most public speaking, like conference kinds of audiences, right? They show up to the presentation and they have an expectation, which is, okay, here's my pamphlet. Speaker X is going to talk about 1, 2, and 3. These are your takeaways. And on paper, it's like, okay, fine, sure. But an audience is not anticipating that speaker is going to take advantage of that moment for the audience, meaning we only have limited amount of time together. So I am going to just destroy your expectations. Yes, what you see on the pamphlet and what you read in the brochure, yeah, I'll get to that. But that's never what people remember. That's never what people remember. I'm going to butcher what she says, so I'm going to paraphrase Dr. Maya Angelou, right? Says, it really doesn't matter what you know. It doesn't. It doesn't matter how accoladed you are. How are you making your audiences feel?
Yeah.
And that cannot be done in a overly scripted, tightly structured, stick to the plan experience. The energy of that live moment brings us to those moments of helping each other feel a certain way.
Right.
And for conference audiences in particular, right, they're not expecting that. So we give them that as like their gift for the day. That's their goodie bag, along with the tote and the pens that have people's logos on them. You also have a branded moment you're never going to forget. And that's the beauty and joy of live public speaking experiences.
Thank you. And speaking of live moments, because this is live moment and we are having a conversation, that whole, what you just said and what I said, it reinforces this idea that I have been constantly assessing and reassessing in my mind, that no matter how good we can get AI to recreate or to create something for us, there's a pattern that happens. And you can actually see that. I don't know if you've ever experienced like AI doing, say, reading a book, doing an audiobook or something like that. There's a degree to a pattern that an audiobook that's generated by AI will keep this pattern. No matter how much you try to identify what tone you want for it, what this, that, and the other, it still holds to this particular pattern. Whereas humans have the ability, the unique ability to walk outside of the pattern at any given moment. And that is what makes it a uniquely human experience. You understand that you're getting a uniquely human experience from any human that's there in front of you.
Yeah.
No matter how good these generative programs and things get, they're
Yeah.
still not, what's the right word for it? I hate to use sentient enough to determine for themselves when and how and where to randomly change the pattern. Because when you're having a conversation and you're pre-anticipating, and this is what a lot of us do, we pre-anticipate something when we have known entities to it. So like you said, somebody gets a pamphlet, they see these are the takeaways, etc. These are my known entities. But what's always unknown is the pattern disruptor as the person that shows up, when they show up, how they show up, and in the moment that they show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. AI, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's technology, advances in technology is nothing new, right? I think we learned that over the pandemic, right? And I think this is a great segue into something I'm going to push back a little bit about live presentations and like being in the room with people, which of course I think is really important. And that's my preference. Okay. But the pandemic taught us pretty quickly. And I, prior to the pandemic, worked in the speaking industry for an agency, right? Our job was to book featured speakers all over the country for live events. And like every industry, we turned to a virtual format to try to make these events work. And what we learned very quickly is that the technology was available, Zoom and Google Meet and Microsoft Teams, and people were doing remote presentations and meetings, but they weren't using them necessarily for everyday events. And so it got really messy very quickly. And I was on the back end of many of these sort of watching these things just crash and burn because too much technology, not enough guidance, not enough testing, not enough planning for such a heavy toll on the human experience, the pandemic and the live events industry and many other industries.
Right.
Just because the technology is there doesn't mean it's going to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think that's what you're saying. It's
it's
there, but doesn't replace the human experience, right?
Right.
It enhances it, right? It's a tool to make it better, more memorable, whatever qualifier you want to use.
Right.
But this is where I want to push back just a little bit. So, yes, live events, live presentations, doing things in front of people for those moments of organic or improvisational creation, right? Mm-hmm. I love it. I don't want anything else. However, the pandemic taught us that, you can't see your audience, right? Maybe they're there. Maybe they're in a small box next to you somewhere, or maybe they're just like what we're experiencing right now. Maybe they're out there in the ether. And yes, I have heard I can't see them, so my connection ability is low and my energy will be affected by that. And it just doesn't work and it just doesn't happen. I like to think of it this way. When a comedian takes the stage in front of thousands of people in the auditorium, and they have their set down and they're doing all the bits and everything's working out and the timing is great and the punchlines are working and the audience is laughing and everything is great. Okay. Mm-hmm. You think that comedian takes the stage once in front of all these people and it just comes together in that moment? So the answer is, of course not. that comedian has to practice. Sometimes they practice in rooms with very few people in it, or sometimes with no one in the room at all.
Mhm.
They're not going to even test the material in, like, brick wall behind them in some, greasy dive bar doing comedy bits. They're not even going to get on stage because they'll be booed out the room if they haven't done the work on their own first. So the pandemic taught me, as someone who is trying to make these events great and put people on virtual stages great, is that irrelevant of where the audience is, your job is to perform. They're out there.
Yeah.
Technology tells us that it's an on-demand point-and-click world. If they want to watch this later, you still got to bring it. The
Yeah.
show is still on, man. Right?
Yes. Yes.
So make your eye contact. It's so stupid. I can't even look you in the eyes, right? Like, I have to look in this camera to make eye contact with you. You owe it to the people out there, whether they're in front of you today or tomorrow, to get your act together, because the show goes on, friends. So, as a pushback, a light little pushback to the live experience is the one we're shooting for. It's all live, right? Today, tomorrow, the next day, whenever. Okay. And that was what I saw as an agent working with speakers and storytellers, the ones that said, okay, I have to train myself to imagine that there's someone else out there,
Yeah.
because the delivery still needs to be crisp. The content needs to be compartmentalized in an effective segue kind of way, right?
That's true. Yes. And there's still quite a lot of social influence that you can have in that particular way.
Oh, for sure. For
I
sure.
can appreciate the pushback. And I think it's really important because, to me, you're not saying that technology is the only way to go. What I don't think either of us would say that. I think what we're saying is that there's room and opportunity for every experience, and we shouldn't get rid of one experience over another experience. We shouldn't say, oh, I'm only ever going to do it this way from here on out. I'm only ever going to do it this way, because each experience holds the opportunity for change,
Absolutely.
for making a difference on other people who are having that experience.
Yeah. I got to see people who never saw themselves as speakers, performers, presenters. It was just part of their job. Like, I have to talk with these people. I have to tell them this information. I just have to do it.
Okay.
And the pandemic, I say the pandemic because it was like a common variable that we all had to negotiate, right? And I had a chance to see technical, highly academic or numerically focused content or data presenters figure out a way to make the driest, most unappetizing content seem exciting by owning this role as, okay, I guess we're all stand-up comedians now. Like, we're all monologuers. We are all camera worthy and should be ready for those moments. Because you realize that, and that goes back to the human element here. When we type something and you post something, people are like, yeah, I mean, like, nice words. But if you can put your face out there and perform to the best of your ability, knowing that it's not about you and what I have to say and what I need to give people, but about creating some moment of connection with your audience. That it even comes through with people who never considered themselves to be a featured speaker. Now, you and I, when we say featured speaker, we tend to, and most of our audience, we tend to think of the big shots on stage with a lot of screens behind them and microphones and doing a lot of hand gestures, right? But the pandemic gave everybody an opportunity to take on that role. People who are like, I'm not really a camera person, I'm not really a people person. It's like, it's time to get comfortable with that. And there's a bit of unlearning that has to happen, but that's where great coaches like you, like me, come into their space and says, you can do this, by the way. And the proof is, in a one-on-one, when the cameras aren't on and they're just being themselves, it's perfect. It's perfect. It's exactly what you need to be. So it's helping them lose a bit of fear factor when it comes to the light's on and I have to perform. And it's about doing it over and over again and keeping sort of a safe, comfortable space just to be yourself. And that's what people want to see more than anything.
They do. And one of the things that they also really, I think, want to experience is the emotional resonance. Humans, we function with emotion. That's how we are. Our species, we are designed in this way. I like to say we have essentially four things going for us. Some people will say a little bit more, a little less, but essentially these four things that are our thoughts, our ideas, our feelings, and our behaviors. And I always try to get people to understand that the only way other people can actually experience your thoughts, your ideas, and your feelings are through your behaviors. And communication is a behavioral tool that helps us
for
get
sure.
that through to an audience. But that requires you not just to say the words, but to feel them too, to feel the underlying meaning and express that part as well, which I see so many people struggle with.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, it's easy for them to write it out on paper. When you experience something on paper or something in written format, it's very different than when you experience something from somebody else who's speaking those words to you.
Yeah.
And that emotional expression, or as I like to call it, the emotional intention behind your words is what resonates the most. When you were talking about Maya Angelou, her famous saying of people will rarely remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel.
Right.
Is because it's true. Everything you say has a feeling, an intentional, emotional feeling and resonance behind it.
Yeah.
So how are we making people feel? That is the foremost important piece. So whenever I'm working with my speakers or anybody who's trying to communicate really anything to others, I'm always asking them, well, how do you want them to feel about what you're saying? Get that narrowed down first. Get that really identified clearly and carefully, and then you can shape the words you need around how they're going to feel.
Yeah. I that resonates with me very loudly. I think of it also when you think about branding, right? I'm not a marketer. I'm not a branding expert. In what people think of branding as traditional branding, right? Logo designs, website designs, color scheme, font styles, right? All that's the brand of the company, right? And if you want to know what someone, who someone is, you got to look at their logo and how that fuzzy bear makes you feel for that company and this slimy frog for another. It's like, okay, yeah, that is branding. I always felt though that the brand narrative, sort of the soul of that brand, like who are you people and why are you here? Why should anyone care about this? Right? Most of that goes on page 9 of the About Us section in timeline form. Okay. And that's not a brand narrative. It seems that the order, as you suggest, and I totally agree, is what is the meaning first, right? The emotional resonance. And then once those things pour out of the product, of the service, of the person, be like, oh, yeah. And then you can craft the shell around those things, right? That sort of thing. And I always just kind of snicker when people are like, oh, I'm in branding and I do logos and websites. It's like, who's doing the first part though? Right? Like isn't there a first part? And if the story isn't clear, if who these people and why their work matters to the world isn't just upfront and palpable, then I wonder how powerful the brand really is, right? As cute as that fuzzy bear is, does anyone really care though? And right. I would like to think that we all care all the time, but I think you and I both know is that most people don't care. They don't care at all,
Yeah, they drop it for the more meaningless things of life, and they don't think about the meaningful aspect of it, which I think, and I want to bring this back to the idea of that experience that somebody has when they're in an audience. So let's bring this back now to the audience's perspective. When in an audience, for me, I don't always necessarily know what experience am I going to have with this particular speaker. And I like to help my speakers think about what their audience needs to experience before how they need to represent it. So the biggest, even going further out, because you're thinking about your audience first. What experience do you want them to have? Do you want them to have an experience where they're sitting there and they look at the person next to them and they start laughing and they have a moment of human connection? Or do you want them to be so focused on you that they forget everything else is around them? Or what are those experiences going to be like? What are you trying to craft for them? So I always ask them, well, this is the height of empathy. And here's the crazy thing. This is the height of empathy. Humans have empathy. Now, there are other creatures on this earth that do have empathy as well, but humans have a very unique relationship with empathy because we have a better understanding of the cause and effect space of it. So what are we trying to affect? And as a speaker, it's really important to say, what do I want my audience to be affected by most? How do I want them to walk away with this particular experience? We go really far out there. Okay, now what emotional intention do I need to resonate with that will give them that experience? So it's a really bigger way of looking at it from a broad place of them before it ever comes down to you.
Absolutely. It's an art form.
It is.
It is. And for the seasoned speaker that says, I've been doing this for 30 some years and don't tell me how to blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, fine. Okay. You have chosen that path and that's okay. And if it works for them, then that's fine. What audiences won't tell them necessarily is that, gosh, it seems to be a lot about you. Mm-hmm. I like it done this way. I prefer it that way, and it's like, yeah. But how are you going to bring this to them? And that takes design. There's intention. It's messy. You got to practice and figure out what works and what doesn't. You have to experiment. It doesn't necessarily just fall into place. It is nice, however, to give people some sort of guideline, right? Because it can seem very overwhelming for someone who doesn't speak a lot in front of others or does every month, but it's still that scary, like, I know I have to give my presentation, but I don't really want to. Mm-hmm. So I like to help people by giving them a formula to consider, right? When it comes to making sure the audience can resonate quickly to the content you want to bring them. Okay. Now, I come up with this kind of structure or template or formulaic style because I like to be in tune to my audience. I am a very right brain natured creature, right? I think in pictures and colors and emotion and creativity, and that's my world, and I'll stay there till I die, right? So someone says, here, fill out this Scantron test or figure out the area of a circle in this geometrical, I'm like, does not compute. Do not think that way. I need you to bring this to my attention in a different kind of way. Mm-hmm. You always have an audience that needs you to reach them on their level, right? So I have this formula, and I think any of your listeners here, the listeners here, can use it, where I like to give people a sense of how much time they should spend in each part of their presentation so that it feels like a cohesive guiding tour for the audience, right? Mm-hmm. I use an analogy, and some of your users, if they checked out any of my stuff, I use this sandwich analogy, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're an artisan deli counter cook, baker, chef, right? And you're going to put together like the most delicious deli sandwich ever. You have your choices of like what kinds of breads to start and then all of the delicious, creamy, crunchy, delicious inside ingredients. And then of course that soaking last bit of bread that just takes the entire sandwich, right? And like they serve it to you and that is a colorful digestive experience, right? They're like, here, we're going to do it at the same time for you. You know that it's going to be the best thing you've had, and you're going to come back for more.
Yeah.
Similarly, the recipe for that kind of engagement is by thinking of your presentation. I like to give people this analogy as a sandwich. Well, it starts with your top bun, right? That's how we begin and how we get people involved. It doesn't mean give them your resume, give them an agenda, and ask them how the weather was. These are very quick and effective ways of creating emotional connection with your audience. And you spend about 15% of your time there. That's where the formula comes in. Top bun, introduction, 15% of your time. So if you have 30 minutes to spend with people, that's 3.5 minutes of how do I get them to bite into this thing? And then, of course, the reason why they came, what's on the pamphlet and the brochure, right? The objectives. We're going to cover this, we're going to cover this, and we're going to cover this. Right. But it doesn't mean you just vomit information on people. You make sure that the ingredients are lined up and there's a through line of sauce and juice and dressing that connects this core idea to this core idea to this core idea. And you spend 70% of your time there because that's what they came for. It's the surprise of how delicious that top bun is. And then when everything is collected at the bottom, that last 15%, that last bun, it's not just a summary of what you've heard. It is now go do something with it.
Right.
And the whole time with that kind of formula or that kind of structure, that delicious example, people going like, oh my gosh, I love this. I want to devour this and I will listen to this again and I will sign up again and I will come back again. I will order that again. So for those who need that kind of right brain model, what's the formula? What's the strategy? 15, 70, 15. If you have to figure out how to get your content in certain areas, that's a way of making the most of your public speaking experience.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. I want to leave that as your final. I mean, you just drove a value piece right there to give to everybody, especially for those who are either thinking about becoming public speakers, are public speakers, and they're trying to rework how they do it, create a new magic formula to it. That is really helpful. And I'll leave everybody with this final thought. Conversation matters. Every single conversation we have drives forward something. Whether it's a new thought that you have that you hadn't previously thought, whether it's a reinforcement, a breaking of another thought, an idea that can come better to fruition. Every conversation we have gives us value in some way. We just have to be willing to, 1, jump into the conversation, and 2, look for the value. That's what we have. That's all we've really got at the end of the day because it's how we show up in the world. So I hope that this conversation was valuable to the people listening and that they'll come back for more conversations because there's a lot of places we can go with conversations and communication. So on that note, we're going to say goodbye and I wish everybody a wonderful weekend ahead and keep on moving forward with conversations.